Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is John Reynolds, CEO and founder of Titan Property Developments. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Stephen.
Joining John is Simon Das, property investor, finance broker and founder of 978 Group. Welcome to you, Simon.
Hi, Stephen.
I know we were up in your area doing a programme about Morecambe Bay.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that. I know you're very enthusiastic about your area, and I think
I am indeed.
We've got some questions today that are going to be right up your street. So there we are. Anyway, John, we're going to start with you. With regards to permitted development permissions, do the panel think that there is consistency when applying the guidelines across the country, or are they finding, like I am, that the criteria seems to change authority to authority? This disparity, in my view, damages and restricts the opportunities offered by the scheme.
Yeah.
I think I know what you're going to say.
100%. I mean, PD, permitted development, is such a great initiative. I was an early adopter in 2013 of the office conversions to residential. 3 key criteria. It eliminates emotion, it eliminates opinion. And as a developer, you could just focus on those 3 key aspects and then ultimately get your planning and more homes were produced. It was really effective. It was successful. Since then, there's just been such a conscious effort by local government, ultimately the councils that had no control, to just get back that control. Article 4, anything they can do to get back into control.
But what's the motivation?
I hate to say it, it's probably ego. They love that control. They want to be able to say, oh, we don't like that. Or we think that you should be doing this. And yet there's clear government guidelines from a development point of view, what we should be adhering to. But they want to control that. So for us as a developer, we try and follow that. And then every time we do anything within a different council, it's interpreted differently.
And are these councils sort of operating as mavericks? Are they all different?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is we've been right the way through a planning application in different councils, I won't name them, where we've been trucking along nicely and we've had someone as the planning officer saying this is the gateway to where we want to be seen and let's do this, let's do that. And then that person's retired or been replaced by someone else within the same council and gone, oh, I don't like that. Oh, this doesn't work for me. Can you change this? And it's like, well, we've just gone through the whole journey. We're trucking along through the 13-week application and we've got to change everything because of an opinion.
Well, this I don't like this business has to stop, doesn't it? I mean, it's just not helpful.
No, opinions shouldn't come into it when there is some really obvious and well-structured legislation.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. The opinion, the ego side of things is where the lack of consistency comes from, which is ultimately what the question was alluding to.
I mean, sometimes I get a little bit concerned. I mean, it's this business of does one cap fit all, and I mean it doesn't often is the case. And I mean where you do see some questionable conversions from shall we say office buildings to residential, if there's not good local infrastructure, if there are not the facilities there to give a good life for people who are actually going to move in at some point, I worry that if that decision is so price sensitive, people move in and then find that they can't live properly or their travel costs have gone through the roof because there's nothing around them. Yeah, I can see the dangers in that, and I can see the need for some sort of local tweaking on that, if you like, to make sure that the infrastructure is there. But
infrastructure specification.
There's the Section 106 in the Community Infrastructure Levy that should help to offset some of that. So there are things in place that can support it, but I get where you're coming from completely. There was a big change of officers in the planning department in somewhere I was working, and it was like night and day as to what was going to get approved and what ended up being approved. And so that shouldn't really be able to happen where in the same council, on the same project, someone steps in and opinion changes a decision so drastically. There needs to be some sort of protection around that.
It is wrong. And again, if the government are seeking to level up, as they put it, that is going to attract developers from all parts of the country to go to different areas. And if they're faced with a total differing set of criteria for the development or its surrounding infrastructure, it's going to be very difficult to get people to invest, isn't it?
You're right. And actually, we looked at something, airspace rights under permitted development quite recently. And when we compared the permitted development legislation against full planning, there was actually very little in it. So we might as well just go full planning, because it's actually now got so much more complicated that, you know, you might as well go the full route.
That's totally against the idea of it,
Exactly.
isn't it? You know, the idea of this was to speed up the process, to permit developments that would benefit the community, stop buildings being left wasted.
Sure. I mean, it worked so well. That 2013 legislation created so many properties. I think clearly what you're saying, I agree with, is that there are people that didn't do the best job. But that could have been dealt with within the legislation rather than, dare I say, rushing to get it out.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, there we are. Nothing's perfect, is it?
No.
We'll see. Okay, Simon, I know this question has been asked on your programme before, but considering the changes in economic climate, could the experts advise on the comparisons between North and South in terms of house prices and yields for investors in the rental market?
Okay, so extremely broadly speaking, you can expect a higher yield and a lower purchase price in the north compared to the south of England. But there is so many variables on any property that it's not quite as simple as that. So at the moment we're seeing in Morecambe yields on buy-to-let of between about 6 and 8%. A lot of the southeast are seeing yields of 2 to 4%, maybe 5%.
I was going to say people in London would kill for that, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Exactly. Interestingly, when I first bought my first property in Morecambe, I was looking at a 4-bed house in Morecambe for £75,000 that would rent at around £550 a month. 3 miles away in Lancaster and Morecambe are joined in the middle, so not far away at all. A 2-bed house for £120,000 that would also rent at about £550 a month. So the yield comparisons, even 2 or 3 miles away in the north of England, can vary drastically as well. So you really need to know your area. But broadly speaking, you're going to be able to buy more properties in the north for the same amount of money, possibly 2 or 3 for one buy-to-let in the south or southeast of England. With that comes diversification. You know, the easiest way to diversify in property is to buy more properties. That way, your tenant in your single buy-to-let property in the southeast moves out, you've got the overheads to pay, you've got no income. Whereas one of your 3 tenants moves out in the north of England because you've bought more properties, you've got the other 2 paying for that void. So
I'm not sure I'll go with your maths there, Simon, because I mean, look, the differences between North and South, one of the key differences is the amount of people that are willing to lease your property.
Well, I mean, there is. I mean, you do get people queuing to rent a property in London. So you do have to take that into account. But we've got 80 properties under management. We've got 2 that are vacant, and they're both vacant because they're undergoing a refurb. So if you know the area and you cater to the right type of tenant and price it correctly, there is a shortage of homes nationally, you know.
Well, I mean, what sort of percentage void level would you advise a buy-to-let investor to allow for in
their calculations? We allow for about 2%, 2.5% void. So if we should have a month's notice if someone's leaving, and in that time we're doing our end of tenancy checks, and usually we've got a couple of weeks before someone moves in. It depends though, because flats turn over tenants a lot more quickly than houses. You know, a 3-bed house, you might have a tenant in for 3 or 4 years quite easily, whereas a flat, it might only be 1 year, so your voids are going to maybe be 5% there instead of 2% on your family buy-to-let.
So, just to digress slightly, we're hearing a lot about these no-fault evictions.
Yeah.
We get a lot of questions in asking pretty well the same. So when you have an assured short-hold tenancy and it comes to its natural end and the proper Section 21s have been served at the right point. Usually I think it's 2 months before, isn't it, if I remember my stuff correctly. What does eviction or lack of eviction through no-fault tenancy mean? Does it mean that you can extend that assured short-hold tenancy?
Ultimately, tenants have the right to stay in that property until a court decides otherwise, and even after that, a bailiff would have to go in and remove a tenant. So the no-fault eviction, it's a little bit of a fallacy, I think.
Well, I think it is, because I mean, from my point of view, I would say you both produced a lease, you both signed it. Why don't you just do what it says? It ends on September the 1st or whatever. Then off you go.
Yeah, absolutely. The rights remain with the tenant after the 6 month. If a new tenancy isn't put in place, it automatically goes to rolling monthly, and the rolling monthly has pretty much the same criteria as the original contract. So,
are you saying it's a bit of nonsense legislation? Really, it's just a headline grabber, because I think that's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's an important place for no-fault eviction, because if a landlord who only has a small portfolio, if their circumstances change, then they need that property back to sell it, to move into potentially. So I think there needs to be a place for it, and it's not giving landlords license just to chuck people out on the street with no reason.
Okay, all right. Well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after break, when we'll be asking Simon and John more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by John Reynolds and Simon Das. Welcome back, guys. John, do the panel think that developers should continue enhancing the specifications of their projects, both in terms of quality fit-outs and materials, which, although welcome, would add further cost to new homes, making them even more unattainable?
Interesting question. And I think if the developer is going to spend more on specification, and I think that brings into the conversation renewables, so air source heat pumps, solar panels, which could make the property more desirable, more saleable, but will the market allow the developer, that could be myself, to try and then get that back, or particularly in the market we're in now, based on affordability, interest rates and so on, will that actually mean that the developer spends more to try and achieve more, but doesn't actually get it, which of course falls into, I guess you call it the buyer's market. So as a developer, it's really important to try and make sure you know where you're going to be spending the extra money. If it's upgrading from NEF to Miele, will you get anything extra for it? Or do you need to be a bit smarter? And again, I think renewables is where we're focusing, because that has the cost is incurred by the developer, but the ongoing saving can be ultimately realised by the purchaser. But will you get that back?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And I mean, I do again struggle with government policy, a bit like electric cars. They say, well, you save this, you save that, you get better parking, you bit less road tax or no road tax or whatever. And then as soon as electric cars start to get popular, they've killed it all, haven't they? Yeah. And it's a bit the same with solar heating, solar panels. They've said, oh no, we'll cut the subsidy now and all the rest of it. And yet they come out a couple of weeks ago and said, we want to encourage it.
Yeah, well, it's confusing.
Don't get it.
It's really confusing. I think, we are in an energy crisis, and I think that the government, the developer is trying to make something happen there that helps people from a future point of view, but it's not clear how that's mapped out. So where do you focus? Where do you spend the money?
When you do your sort of customer surveys as sort of follow up or whatever either through your agents or your own sales staff, are you getting actually more questions on the efficiency of the building itself now?
Yes, we are.
It's really prevalent.
We are. Yeah, in the same way that I was actually caught out, for example, just using that as an example, where we were doing town centre apartments going into COVID. That's what everybody wanted. Suddenly, everyone wanted a house, or certainly a flat with a balcony or outside space or roof garden, or we're looking for houses with gardens and close to amenity space. So it's that whole, where do you keep your focus?
Well, this again comes down to planning and all the sort of peripheral items that affect a developer. It's this time scale, isn't it? It's this 3 to 7 years or whatever it is that it takes you to bring a development to fruition, and the market's changed, the requirements have changed, the demand's changed.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
What do you think, Simon?
I think if you are investing more in spec, it should be around green energy measures. I think beyond that, obviously it varies from market to market, but up-speccing, people are going to see less value in that at the moment, or be able to afford less of an increase on their purchase price for fancy brands and things. But green energy has got to be something that the value is seen in.
I think you're both absolutely right on that. And I mean, John, I think you will know as an experienced developer, actually, you can make things look a lot better than they are if you're clever with your materials.
Yeah.
Well, there's no need to spend an awful lot of money, is there?
Yeah, it's the classic put gold taps in, you're not going to suddenly get more at all. It's passing something on to the purchaser so that you've spent the money on the infrastructure, they then get the long-term benefit. And that ultimately is only going to help with their cash flow, and that's a key thing for people right now.
And the valuation, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And financing costs with higher EPCs attracting lower finance.
Now, outside of the energy certificates, are you finding valuers particularly inquisitive about the green credentials of a property?
Starting. Yeah, it's early, but I think that's coming.
What about in the north of England? Any different, do you think?
Well, I mean, we're mainly seeing it. We've got a lot of Victorian properties, so they were built to last, but they're not the most energy efficient with the high ceilings, large windows, no cavities.
Well, if you insulate the loft, all it happens, it comes out the front door and the windows downstairs, doesn't it?
So it's certainly something that we're all quite mindful of at the moment, and hoping that the government will step in and show a way of hitting those EPC ratings without having to spend 20 or 30,000. And I think that that could be a quite common figure for people to have to spend to upgrade a property. And I think the government need to find a way of lessening that burden, or they're going to have to make exceptions to the rule, which aren't hitting the energy agenda anyway. So.
Okay. All right, Simon, your question. Can the experts advise on how difficult it would be to obtain funding for investment in residential properties, which will be primarily used for holiday lets? Rental rates should be at a much higher level than normal rentals, albeit that voids might be slightly higher.
Yes, so it's becoming increasingly more simple. It's a growing market. It's a market that has boomed over the last decade or so. And post-COVID, we've seen a lot more people looking for staycations in the UK. So that market's growing even further now. So with that, there's more and more lender appetite. We're seeing more lenders enter the market with their SA, service department, or holiday let products. But some of the best products that we're seeing, particularly for new entrants to the market, are those from the commercially minded lenders who do buy to let, who are saying, we'll assess your property on its credentials as an AST, as a standard property. And if we're willing to lend 75% loan to value on that model, we're happy for you to run a serviced apartment, a short-term let out of it. Now that obviously has the benefit of being underwritten as a standard buy-to-let, which is simpler. It has the benefit of generally a slightly lower rate than you would get on a specific holiday let product. And it has the benefit of, for a new entrant to the market, not having to prove these big figures of cash flow that you're going to get from this holiday let. And it also gives you that surety that if something goes wrong, you can probably turn it into a standard buy-to-let property and still make an income, because the bank wouldn't lend otherwise.
Good. Okay. Well, look, just before we close the show down, there's something I want to ask you both. I'm sure you've both been on our programs before, and I'm certain other contributors have had this discussion before. It's about government intervention and help for those that are struggling in this crisis. And the conversations have all been fairly similar in the past. No, we don't think the government will do anything to help, and there's not much you can do to help anyway. It's a circumstance. But I see from the press that the government are calling in the banks and the building societies and are instructing them I don't know how strong a word that is or what it really means in governmental terms, but they're instructing them to take a much more, shall we say, liberal view of these arrears that are being built up and the people who are genuinely suffering hardship. Now, I don't know whether that means we might have a sort of moratorium on repossessions like we did with the commercial properties during COVID or other sorts of properties. What do you think, guys? What do you think's going on?
I mean, it feels like it's coming. That's the one thing that is obvious. We're just sort of all going into winter is coming, and so there are people that are choosing to sit at home and not put their heating on, and that's often the vulnerable, the poorest in the community, the elderly, who really need that. They could have young children and they can't afford to put their heating on. They can't afford to eat properly. This is England. So when I say it feels like it's coming, something has to be done because it's going to become a crisis.
Yeah.
And the people that are not putting their heating on are choosing to because they know they can't afford it. So they're being accountable, being responsible. But at the deficit of them actually not potentially being well and living properly.
Yes, I think the other thing is as well that unfortunately, at the lower end of the scale, where people are suffering most, it's often those people who are, I don't wish to sort of criticise them in any way, it's certainly not a criticism, but they're not always the most articulate of people. And also, they're often the sort of people that will be intimidated by having to phone a big company and explain their financial sort of hardships and difficulties.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think we've just sort of got to get over this and have some kind of facility to assist.
Absolutely, it's like David versus Goliath, isn't it?
It's
the people who are suffering the most and suffering the soonest are those who are probably disillusioned by the system, feel like the system is against them, and don't have someone on their side coaching them through these sort of situations, unlike big businesses that probably do have a lot more support. And it's words from the government, isn't it? We'll see if it turns into action, serious action that's going to benefit those people that really need it, because everyone's suffering, but it's those in that lower sector that are going to be hit hardest and worst.
Yeah. And I'm not sure where the way out is. That's the issue. I mean, if we have a sort of shaft of light over there, you can head for it and have a bit of confidence. But I just don't see it at the moment.
No, there's been a lot of poor decisions over the past decade or so, and now we're in a tight spot. But there will be a way through.
It's whether the government waits until we've got a crisis or whether they preempt it like you are doing now and actually put something in place. Because you're right, those people won't necessarily be heard until there's a real problem.
It's really bad. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for on this show. So big thank you to my guests today, who've, I hope, tried to give you some comfort in terms of the problems that we're all experiencing and answering your questions while doing so. We at Property TV will try and keep you up to date on any innovations or interesting progress in that way. So, John Reynolds, CEO, founder of Titan Property Developments, thank you for coming in, John. Simon Das, property investor, finance broker and founder of 978 Group, thank you very much for coming in, travelling all the way down here. Great to see you both. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.